Hello everybody and welcome to The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. I'm Alexander Williamson and today we will be talking about the most popular fish in the aquarium hobby today. And that is the Betta Splendens. We're going to be talking about a piece of secret history that takes a lot of colorful twists and turns. And over the time that I've been researching these wonderful fish that I keep in a number of my tanks, in a number of species and a number of different color lines and styles, we will be talking about what would happen if you gave a fish, specifically a betta, acid, LSD, lysergic acid diethylamine. That is what we will be finding out in about 15 to 20 minutes from now when we put this in the... Wait, this is just a piece of paper. That's not what we're doing. Luckily, or maybe unfortunately, the US government and a group of educators has already taken on the task of trying this experiment, and for reasons that involve the future of the world and the people in its existence. In fact, saving the world is what they thought they may, in fact, be doing with these experiments. They've already done this test over 17 times for us. So let's talk about this bizarre piece of aquarium and scientific and human history. Follow me and we'll jump right in. Alright everybody, this is a rather bizarre story, and we need to go back and talk about what it is that betta are and why they were used and why they were domesticated in the first place, in order to explain why in the heck did we take these fish and subject them to one of the strongest hallucinogens or substances that is psychoactive known to humanity. So here, I just quickly wanted to dispel that you can keep two bettas together, male and female. Two males can be a little more violent sometimes, but I've kept up to 40 bettas together. However, historically, that is not the case. Betta were domesticated from the wild and brought into homes and public arenas around the world to be fought. They were first discovered and bred in Southeast Asia, in Thailand and the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. However, over time, the beauty and the ease of care of these fish became very well known, and they spread. They spread along trade routes, and they spread along European colonial routes that existed at the time, as well as later on through different wars. People would be stationed places in Southeast Asia and return to Europe or America, seeing more colorful versions of these fish and telling tales of how they would fight ferociously. So early on, we're talking 500 to 1,000 years ago. Hey, finish up your business. Hold on, guys. As I was saying, 500 to 1,000 years ago, the Thai people decided to take one of the 70 or so species of these fish out of the wild and put them into bowls or ponds. They would breed them, and over time, they realized that the males in the breeding season would fight one another in order to establish dominance and who was going to get to mate with the prettiest female fish in their group, in their fishy brains. So, these fish were selectively bred for hundreds of years after this to fight, and they were both fought to the death and fought symbolically. I will have an entire video coming out detailing this history and how much farther back it goes than we realized until very recently due to the help of DNA testing. But in this video, we just need to know that they were fought and they were selectively bred. Every year to 2 years, a generation could be born. So we're talking 500, 600 generations possibly of these fish becoming more and more violent up until the 1800s. Color was not a primary issue with the breeding. It was getting the fins to be streamlined and getting them to be tough, getting them to have a high stamina. And actually, in one of the odd cases of fish domestication, they were actually bred to be healthy and vigorous, to survive in harsh conditions and to withstand a lot of punishment from fighting with other fish. Oftentimes we select for beauty and finnage and colors, and we lose track of those things, and so their health falls by the wayside. However, unintentionally, their health has kind of been selected for in order to have the best fighter. Now, these fish were gambled on all the way back in the 500 to 800 years ago era of Southeast Asia. In fact, in Cambodia and Thailand, there are actually statues and etchings that have recently been confirmed as authentic that mention the king or the Buddhist leader of certain regions. I believe there are 3 or 4 of these landmarks, putting out edicts saying that you could not keep these fish, you could not fight these fish. And in other cases, like in the 1850s, it was that you could not have these fish unless you were of the royal family or the king of Siam at the time. So they knew back then that gambling was a problem, and also being that Buddhists were predominantly in power in the region during those times, with the exception of a few Muslim eras, they also didn't really approve of the fighting or taking of life for amusement or for gambling's sake. So this brings us to a fish that is mean, lean, and ready to fight all of the time for up to 7 or 8 hours on end. Each village would take their champion fish and they would fight it with the next village over, and they would bet on it. And fish actually had statues made after them. They could fetch many, many hundreds of dollars in today's equivalency if you were trying to convert the amount of money that people spent on them. Some commanded a price as heavy as a house in order to have a winning champion Siamese fighting fish or Thai fighting fish. So the Betta Splendens, as we know it, went from a wild fish to this mean fighting fish. And the U.S. government knew this well by 1948, and when they started a special program. This program may have been familiar to some of you, as it was named Project MK Ultra. And what it really was the United States after World War II trying to figure out by any means necessary how it could conduct chemical, mind, or social, psychological warfare and win. In the Cold War era of the world during that time, everything was still on the table. The atomic bomb had just been invented, and it was thought that the impossible could be made possible with chemical engineering and atomic energy. Also during this time, in the 1940s, earlier on and right at the end of the war, a man named Albert Hofmann invented lysergic acid diethylmade 25, commonly known as LSD acid. So he experienced what a profoundly strong chemical this was, a hallucinogen that could severely impact the mind. And word got around to psychologists, counselors, therapists, and they started using this substance in the 1950s, late 40s, but really the 1950s. And with this project running, soon enough, academics came to the US government and said, we have this powerful substance, and we think maybe we could spray it on people and make them give up fighting altogether. They would be so confused, so lit, that they would actually stop fighting and lose their mind. And so the US government thought, well, maybe we can induce schizophrenia. Maybe we can cause violent, soldiers at war. And World War II was full of substances in the war fighting. amphetamines and opiates alike on all sides were given to soldiers to create even fierce fighting than you'd expect in a normal war, and to terrible effect. The Banzai charges, the Blitzkrieg, and the American soldiers on bombing runs or offensive movements into Germany and into mainland Japan as they headed ever closer to the mainland, island hopping. During these bloody battles, it was very common to use amphetamine and as well as to medicate from the other substances in the war chest and in the medical tent. So these people come back from war, these people need therapy, and the same minds get together with the people who have been using this chemical, trying to see what exactly it is that it does. They don't know exactly, but they know it is profound. And they decide, we better start testing on animals. So they tested on mice, they tested on monkeys, and sure enough, it has an effect. It totally disorients them, and they are left pretty much useless to do their normal everyday tasks. However, they seem pretty agitated at times. They can be totally loving one moment and then go into a totally violent rage the next moment. And so they say, you know, we need to continue this. We need to try other things. And they come up with 60 chemicals they're going to start testing on, and they're going to try combining, and they're going to give to these poor little fish. So they get the most violent bettas they can find in Thailand and Europe, and they bring them over to the US and begin studying the effects of the LSD on these fish by soaking it in the water and starting with 1 nanogram per 100 milliliters of water, which is an extremely high dose, about 10 times the dose that a human would take recreationally, is where they started, and they went up from there. And this is the story and info of what happened during those experiments. So in 1954, Dr. W.M.J. Turner and also Abrahamsons and Evans first did a study on a bunch of different fish, 22 species of fish, and they tried 60 different psychoactive drugs or different chemicals on these fish. They dissolved the stuff in the water, and they wanted to see what it would do within 6 hours. Now, a lot of these things, including peyote, or rather mescaline extract, didn't do anything. In fact, ergot did, and so did LSD-25. This paper goes on into a lot of detail and all the other things they tried, but they also tried Demerol and morphine. Those also did have an effect in calming the fish and making the fish happy, they assume, as in it displayed its mating colors, but was very relaxed and basically laid at the bottom of the aquarium. Now, in this paper, they came to a conclusion, which was that LSD number 25 causes the fish to have intensified aggression of the species, and that LSD-25 does influence instinctive behavior, especially combativeness. So at this point, they're thinking maybe we can use it on our own soldiers. Maybe we can make super soldiers that are just these ultimate fighters, and basically the government's throwing money at projects like this. So the paper gets written up, and soon after, a lot of other scientists are looking at it and thinking, I don't know about this. It sounds a little bit off to me. We've seen this medication, this substance in other people, and not just in animals, and in people. They can tell us what they're feeling, and they said, they're feeling pretty good usually. So they're assuming it's working off of maybe serotonin in the brain. So in 1956, 2 years later, in the Journal of Science 123, they do another study, and they also try ergot along with LSD as the control. And they also tried to mark out specifically more specific behaviors and they wanted to put the fish in a natural environment. In fact, they wanted to study them in the wild, or as close as they could get to it, and they built them fully planted, fully balanced ecosystems. And then later on in 1959, another study, they actually went over to the Mekong Delta and found rivers and ponds that had various species of them, including the Betta Splendens, and they actually did their work based off of that, which, man, they did a lot of these studies. And the scary part is that under MK Ultra, it was not released until the 1990s, but they actually did these studies on humans who didn't know they were part of the study. That's a whole other bag of worms. It was conspiracy theory material for a long time, but under the Freedom of Information Act, it became fact. So here were the main things they were looking at. Backward movement with pectoral fins, head up at the surface, the Cartesian diver, or vertical, the fish going straight up and down, the barrel roll, which is like a plane does, a barrel roll, actually twisting and turning, which if you've had a betta, you know they would not really ever do fully for no reason. Body kinking or twitching, basically, and then quiescent state, slow deliberate movements, lateral displaying, and darkened pigment or coloring up, basically. And then you can see here they have a chart of different compounds similar to LSD, and they also throw demerol in there and mescaline. You can see mescaline, but demerol is like it's an opiate similar to morphine, and it only caused, like I said, it caused their head up to the surface, and then it caused them to color up a little bit with the darkened pigment thing, and so did mescaline. There are about 6 different graphs like this from 6 different studies that happened back to back, and the best results they got, most consistent, were in a natural habitat. In fact, the sheer fact that humans were watching them, or if other fish were visible in the room, there's a paper written on the fact that their aggression goes up when they can see other fish in the room. So it's kind of interesting that they are so aggressive, especially at this point before they were being bred for beauty as much, and they were being bred more for the last 500 years for anger and basically their ability to stay in the fight, that they were very, very jumpy fish. So later on, they try out 60 different agents, 22 species of freshwater fish. Oddly enough, the betta was the one that had the most, that was primed to these reactions. So they had some thoughts that, they even tried the fabled adrenochrome, mescaline, hycion, bufatine from the frog, and another medication called pilocarpine, which was actually successful in bringing all the effects to a halt. But what they came to basically was a discovery that all these things that we just looked at on the chart were present when they were trying to look at these fish. They were doing barrel rolls. They were hanging out alone. They were looking at plants for like 15 minutes straight, and then they'd go over to other bettas in the tank, and if they put up to 10, 12 together, sometimes they would all just get together and just lay on their side or rub up against each other. Other times, 1 or 2 would just snap and start attacking the others. So there's really not a good sense of what's going on or a predictable outcome from this. So basically, they're just playing with these fish and making them live in a waking dream state, honestly, is what it appears. But they do find that this medication could possibly help, and they think maybe it could help humans that have had too much of the substance. Turns out it doesn't work the same. There's a different neural pathway. But more studies are done. Again, Dr. Turner. And in the 70s later on, they do more studies, and they looked at those first original studies, and in a publication called Animal Behavior, a professor named Stephen Goldstein did a study and found that adult male domestic Siamese fighting fish normally engage in long, intense, aggressive encounters and therefore require
physical isolation from other members of their species. When male and female bettas were placed in a suitable environment, atypically short fights occurred, resulting in subsequent formation of a stable community. It suggests that the establishment of a stable community is related causally to a reduction in the intense forms of aggression and aggressive behavior during the initial fights, which happen for rank in social hierarchy. So, basically what they're saying is that they've done other research on these fish, and they find that they're not actually these hardcore killers, even the domesticated ones that are supposed to be. They only are if they're kept alone and then introduced to another betta, specifically usually one of the opposite gender, and then they fight for rank. However, if they live together in one body of water, there's plants, there's plenty of food, and so on, they actually only nip at each other here and there, and that's the end of that. So, they do the tests again with giving them plenty of food, growing the fish up together from the start, and they find different results, which are that it actually doesn't cause any aggression in the fish, causes them to basically space out, mind their own business, or more often than not, just hang out together at the top of the tank or in the corner of a tank and just kind of chill out and do barrel rolls and flash, which is when they chase one another kind of and brush against something, or just randomly dart off and go rub up against something. So really they learned almost nothing from these experiments other than that the same chemical that causes people to feel a range of intense feelings, see visual things that aren't there, feel things that aren't there, hallucinatory states, basically the same thing is happening probably with fish, or to some degree happening in fish. And they put all these fish through that to find this out. So, turns out maybe that chemical nor these fish are the way to save the world from a Russian enemy that will stop at nothing to kill all of the Americans. Or that was kind of the thinking at the time in our Cold War mindset. But the experiments did get much, much darker. These experiments got a lot darker in the sense that they actually started testing again on humans. And it's not known when this testing stopped because the military burned a lot of the papers that gave them info or recorded info on it. But it's thought that in the early 1960s, the program stopped sometime after a finding on a case that happened in the late 50s when a person actually jumped and or possibly was thrown out a window by Secret Service agents. So you guys can look into all of that human history on your own. This is a fish channel, but I just wanted to tell you this weird little slice of history when the US government tried for basically 15 years to get these fish, to show them the mystery to either pacifying a super violent army of killers or to create that in American soldiers. And what turned out happening was, well, neuroscientists have used this research later to realize that bettas have a very complex social structure, and they have a very complex neurology and biology and probably psychology. And that should be no surprise to any of you who have kept these lovely fish and have observed them. They're so inquisitive, and yes, they can be quite the hunters, and they can be a little aggressive. Look at this one now. Oh boy, it just bit that snail. But again, they're kind of vying for rank or simply eating. All these babies have grown up together in this tank. Now there's white cloud minnows, there are endlers, and there are meteor minnows all in here with about, 10 or 12 young Betta Splendens, and they're not any more violent than anyone else. In fact, that was kind of crazy. We caught that on camera. Of course, they try to prove me wrong right while I'm filming them. But they're in a little 10-gallon tank, and they get along just fine here. So just follow the care videos, and please, please, please do not dose your fish. The science has been done, and it was pretty pointless then, but it would be even more pointless now, and just mean to the fish. So, thanks guys for watching. If you enjoyed yourself today, I would highly approve of you dosing that like button and coming back another time, subscribing if you want to hear the full history of this awesome fish, and the fact that it may have been bred as far back as goldfish, now that we know, and another upcoming video that will be on, dun, 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 now that you're seasick, half-beaks, and how they have been bred for the same exact purpose of fighting each other, symbolically more so with these guys, and basically humans would bet and gamble on which one would tire out first. Less tearing at each other's fins and more thumb wrestling, so to speak, when they wrap around each other and push one another. So, I will talk to you next time, and I want to thank you so very much for joining me on The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.